Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week.
There are football hooligans, and then there are names that become folklore. Names whispered in pubs. Names older lads still bring up 40 years later with that look in their eye. The kind of names that survive long after the fighting stopped. And if you speak to enough old Aston Villa lads from the 70s and 80s, eventually one name always comes back around. Pete the Greek. Not because he was the biggest, not because he led some massive organisation, and not because he wanted fame, but because men who stood on terraces back then genuinely believed he was capable of absolutely anything. This was a bloke who allegedly headbutted a police horse, a bloke who used to do pull-ups on lampposts while walking to games, a bloke who would run into entire mobs on his own just because he was bored waiting for the rest of the Villa lads to arrive. And perhaps, most famously of all, a man respected enough that Millwall's top boy Tiny once demanded a straightener with him in front of hundreds of watching hooligans. Now, before we go any further, I want to ask the older viewers something. How many of you actually saw Pete the Greek back in the day? Because when you read the stories, he almost sounds fictional, like one of those Terrace myths that gets bigger every year. But the strange thing is, every single old Villa lad seems to tell the same stories. And when that happens, you start realizing maybe the myth was real. Pete's story has never been told on YouTube before, and this is a tribute to the great man. If you know, you know. To understand Pete the Greek, you first need to understand Aston Villa in the 70s. This wasn't Premier League football. This wasn't sanitised football. This was third division football. Rusty grounds, massive away followings, skinheads, bother boots, scarves wrapped around fists. Entire towns waiting for the Villa to arrive because they knew trouble usually followed them through the gates. Villa were one of the sleeping giants of English football at the time. Huge support, huge club. And wherever they travelled, firms wanted to scalp. That created a mentality among some Villa lads where backing down simply wasn't acceptable. The goal wasn't just to support the team, the goal was to take ends, to steam into home support, to stand your ground. And among the lads leading that mentality was Pete the Greek. The funny thing is, Pete himself admitted he barely even cared about football in the beginning. He was 18 when he first went down the Villa. Living in a hostel with other lads, deciding whether to go Blues, Albion or Villa. One of them said, "Come to the Villa, there's always fighting with the away fans." Pete liked the sound of that immediately. That tells you everything you need to know about him. Most football lads became hooligans because of football. Pete almost became a football fan because of hooliganism. Even years later, he openly admitted it. Lads would talk tactics around him, talking about needing a new midfielder or a new fullback, and Pete would just nod along, pretending to care. Deep down, he was thinking, "Let's go and find a row, you boring divs." He once admitted it took him 8 years to understand the offside rule. Then when the rules changed, he gave up trying altogether. That honesty is part of what makes him fascinating. There's no pretending, no fake romance, no fake morality. He loved violence, loved the adrenaline, loved the fear, loved the reputation, and he became addicted to it. The name Pete the Greek came early. Every time trouble kicked off, lads kept shouting about that Greek bloke fighting over there again. Eventually, the nickname stuck, despite the fact he wasn't even Greek, half Arab, half English. But the name sounded right for the character he was becoming, and by the mid-70s, the stories about him were already spreading around football grounds across England. Some of them sound unbelievable even now. One of the most famous was the police horse incident against Manchester United in 1975. Yes, Pete genuinely admitted to headbutting a police horse. Not jokingly tapping it, properly headbutting it. When asked why, he simply said he used to do crazy things to psych himself up. Headbutting walls, lampposts, anything to get himself into that violent state of mind before trouble started. The best part is what happened next. He got arrested, sent to court, and the judge ordered psychiatric evaluation. And when somebody later asked him what happened to the horse after he nutted it, Pete calmly replied, "It wobbled." That's the kind of humour old school football lads love. Dark, stupid, violent, completely ridiculous, but somehow funny at the same time. And this is where Pete's legend really grew, because unlike a lot of Terrace names who stayed protected within groups, Pete constantly went alone. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. There's story after story of him charging into mobs before reinforcements arrived. At Preston, Villa lads accidentally wandered into a cul-de-sac facing a large mob waiting for them. Most people would panic. Pete started ripping apart somebody's wooden fence, handing pieces out as weapons, then charged the Preston lot himself before the other Villa special even arrived. At Bolton, he allegedly got bored waiting in the pub while the lads drank, spotted Bolton coming round a corner, and simply sprinted straight into them alone. At Blackpool Station, he came flying off a train wearing a yellow motorcycle helmet and immediately started fighting police. That image alone tells you everything about the era. No social media, no cameras everywhere, no choreography. Just chaos. And the strange thing is, older Villa lads never describe Pete as some organised mastermind. Quite the opposite. They describe him almost like a human hand grenade. Once he went off, you either followed him or got left behind. One former Villa lad described him perfectly when he said, "He was his own army." That line sums him up better than anything else. But the reason Pete the Greek became immortal in Terrace folklore wasn't just because he fought. Plenty of men fought. Plenty of men were game. What separated Pete was the sheer unpredictability and madness surrounding him. This was a bloke who used to take his missus into Birmingham city pubs on Saturday nights hoping for a fight. A bloke who once smashed his head into a locked gate at Carlisle because Villa lads were trapped outside, and the gate allegedly burst open. A bloke who got so addicted to adrenaline and reputation that it eventually destroyed his marriage. His wife reportedly gave him an ultimatum: stop the fighting and stop the Villa, or she was leaving. Pete's response: bye. Close the door on the way out. That line tells you something darker about Terrace culture back then. For some men, it stopped being a hobby. It became identity, addiction, brotherhood, purpose. And nowhere was that mentality more dangerous than against Millwall. Now, younger viewers might not fully understand what Cold Blow Lane meant in the 70s. Going there wasn't just another away day. It was considered one of the most hostile places in English football. Proper old-school violence, minimal police control, savage reputation. And when Villa went there in 1973, they walked into hell. Pete was part of the Villa steamers who entered the Millwall end that day. Think about that for a second. Not outside the ground. Not arranged somewhere else. straight into their end at Cold Blow Lane. Pete later admitted it was probably the worst Terrace fight he had ever been involved in. Toe-to-toe violence for around 20 minutes. Not seconds. 20 minutes. That's an eternity in a football fight. He remembered seeing Millwall's Harry the Hatchet burying an axe into a Villa lad's head during the chaos. Absolute madness. Eventually, Villa got overwhelmed, but even Millwall lads later admitted very few firms would even attempt what Villa had done that day. And from that moment on, real respect formed between the firms. Not friendship, respect. Because both sides knew the other would have a go. The rivalry carried on for years afterwards. Walls near Millwall carried warnings saying, "Villa turn back." Whenever Villa were in London, rows with Millwall usually followed. There was genuine hatred there, but also fascination. And then came the famous straightener. Now, this next part almost sounds unreal to younger fans today, but older lads listening will know exactly what this was about. Back then, if reputations were big enough, sometimes entire mobs would stop just to watch two men settle something themselves. No weapons, no pylons, just pride. Villa Millwall at Villa Park. The old uncovered Whitton End. Packed with bodies. Packed with tension. Millwall had brought a proper firm that night, and according to witnesses, one of them had even brought a shooter wrapped in newspaper with his elastic bands around it. That's how serious things could become. But amidst all the chaos, one massive Millwall lad stepped forward, demanding one man. "I want your top man, Pete the Greek." That man was Tiny, one of Millwall's most feared names. And Pete stepped forward, smiling. Just imagine that scene. Hundreds watching, police unaware. Two men walking up the old concrete steps toward the back of the Whitton End near the old piss corner. Blood already pumping through both firms. Everyone gathering in a circle. And then it started. Toe to toe. No running. No backing off. No interference. Just two feared Terrace names trying to prove who was top boy for their club. One witness later described it like gladiators. Cage fighting before cage fighting existed. Hundreds of lads completely ignoring the football because they were mesmerised by what they were watching.
And here's the important part. Nobody really won. Neither man quit. Neither man folded. The fight only ended because police started noticing hundreds staring away from the pitch. Then came the moment younger generations probably won't fully understand. Tiny and Pete shook hands afterwards and calmly walked back to their respective mobs. Different era, different rules. And whether people agree with hooliganism or not, stories like that are exactly why Terrace folklore still fascinates people decades later. Pete himself admitted he probably should have died with some of the rows he got involved in. And when you hear the stories, you understand what he means. He was jailed multiple times. Forest, Derby, Albion. Violence charges stacked throughout his life. 10 separate prison stints altogether, according to Pete himself. But prison almost seemed part of the culture back then for some lads. A risk accepted as normal. And despite all the violence, there's something oddly emotional buried underneath these stories too. Because every older Villa lad who talks about Pete speaks with admiration. Not fear. Admiration. They describe him like a warrior from another era. Somebody who genuinely would not leave mates behind. Somebody who would steam into impossible odds simply because he couldn't help himself. One Villa lad remembered watching United fans swarm Villa outside Old Trafford in 1974. Bodies everywhere. Chaos. Punches flying. And amongst the melee, he spotted Pete bobbing up and down through the crowd, throwing punches before disappearing beneath bodies again and reappearing somewhere else moments later. Like a man possessed. And maybe that's what Pete the Greek really was. Not the hardest man in England, not some undefeated street fighter, but a symbol of what football hooliganism used to be before cameras, banning orders, social media and organised meetups changed everything. Raw, chaotic, personal, mad. The old Aston Villa steamers weren't famous because they wore expensive clothes or posted online. They became legends because they physically walked into hostile grounds and took whatever came next. And Pete the Greek stood right at the centre of that mythology. Even now, decades later, the stories still survive. The pull-ups on lampposts, the police horse, the yellow helmet, charging firms alone, the straighteners, the marriage destroyed by football violence. And maybe the craziest thing of all, the fact older lads still laugh while telling the stories. So I want to ask the viewers this. Could characters like Pete the Greek even exist in modern football culture anymore? Or was that type of hooligan a product of a completely different Britain, a completely different football world? And, for the older viewers especially, where does Pete rank among the maddest football characters you ever heard about? Because, whether you see him as a warrior, a lunatic, or something in between, one thing is certain. Nobody who ever saw Pete the Greek forgot him. Listen, I greatly appreciate everyone that watches my videos. All I want to do is create a place where we can share stories and remember the good times. If you have a story you want to share, then get in touch, and I will put it out there, anonymously if you like. But real stories from proper lads is what keeps this channel going. You can find me on Facebook, just type in Everything Casual and my page will come up. Feel free to contact me on there. And a massive thank you to everyone that has subscribed so far. You have played your part in helping the channel grow. We bring you everything to do with the football casual world, the fashion, the stories, crime characters relating to the football casual world. Literally everything. So click like and subscribe. And that way you will be notified when we put out a new video. See you next time. God bless. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.